Hello everyone, welcome to our competitive analysis and strategy class. Today's session, I will welcome you to our class and of course, I will be honored to give you the current subject. Now, let's talk a little bit about do's and don'ts for organizational objectives. Okay? So, first of all, it's important to understand that companies they face a lot of situations and a lot of rivalry involved in the industry. In order to stand out, of course, survive, and gaining as much customers as possible, it's important to define how I'm applying or how do I want to attract as many customers as possible, what is the competition currently doing, and of course, I'm capable of doing certain things. Okay, can I do certain things? Well, I need to evaluate all these matters in order to define what we know as a strategy. In this session, we will focus on something that is quite specific and important to define before getting into the strategies. Do you know what is it? Let's take a look. So, in order to advance to our first session, let's see a first approach of objective. As you know, in your daily life and also in businesses, they need to define what do they want to do in 3, 5, or even 10 years, okay? The term that they establish needs to be clear. In order to do so, you need to define objectives. Those objectives need to answer what? What do I want to achieve? Okay? And another thing is that managers and all people that are implicated in the business, they must understand the characteristics and the things that you want to achieve. Okay? Otherwise, we're going to have problems in communication. People are going to find difficult to understand or even to obtain the objective that you define. Okay? And another important thing, objectives aren't just situated in the strategic level. We also need to think in the operational, okay? In the daily life, in daily situations. We need to know what are the minor objectives or the objectives that I need to follow in the short term that will guide me in order to get into the big ones. Why do we need to establish objectives? Here we can see a couple of steps, okay, that help us to know why do we need to establish objectives. First of all, because you will be working with resources. And so far, most of businesses, they have limited resources. So they really need to know if you're using them correctly, if it's the best possible, and of course, if there should be any implication that they must take into account. Another thing is actually the congruency, okay? Once you establish, for example, that your company will be sustainable, then your objectives should also be sustainable. If you define that your company is going to be inclusive, well, I'm hoping that you have a very good detail in what is inclusivity in your business. Another thing is that you will take an advantage, okay? Remember, we want to stand out, we want to attract as many customers and getting a lot of revenues, but that's only going to be possible if you define your objectives correctly. Another thing is that we can also measure if something could be or not be achievable. Be careful because one of the main problems that we have while establishing objectives is that they aren't fulfilled. And of course, we need to quantify the results, okay, which we will see later. Another thing, it's here we can see an example of SMART objectives. It's quite common and mostly used, and as here we can see the 5 elements of a SMART model: specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. As you can see here, the objective doesn't need to be too long, but needs to be clear enough so people know actually what do you want to achieve. Okay? And of course, as we mentioned, with the quantification aspect, we can see that we are talking about time, hours, and of course, specific revenues. Another key aspect is while defining, most of the time we use SMART objectives. But is the only model available for objectives? Not necessarily. There's also the pure and clear objectives. As we can see here, we might find common things, but also we're going to see that, well, here it says that it's positively stated, it's ethical. Quite an interesting approach, because in the SMART one, we didn't mention about ethics. The second thing is with the challenging, no? And the legal. Is it legal? Is it something that we can do? And of course, not going against legal aspects. And of course, that is agreed. It has to be something that is accepted by others. If it's by force, or you are doing it something without the agreement or the voluntarily aspect, you may have a lot of problems. It's quite interesting that these two models also help us to make a clear objective. Okay, it's important for us to know about this so we don't have any problems in future, because once you're executing an objective, changing the guideline or doing other things might be quite difficult. Here, another thing is that we need to measure the outcome. While you're defining the objective, you also need to know about how do you plan to measure that. Okay, so why? Because sometimes you say, okay, I achieved the objective, or I didn't achieve the objective, but by how much? By 1%, 10%, exactly the same as I was expecting. And I need to know if the result was actually due to my actions, or it was due to external things that happened, kind of like with the COVID and the streaming platforms. Okay, it was like they had a huge advantage because no one else could entertain other things. And of course, those variables that affect the outcome. Okay, once you declare them and you define them, it's going to be easier for you to know that in the future, maybe those aspects will implicate again. And of course, there are common errors that sometimes are sustained. Here we can see that, well, they are not well defined. They are not related with strategy that you define. Maybe it's outdated. You establish an objective based on superstition, in what you believe, maybe not in the resources that you currently possess. So you may have a lot of problems if you define objective based on nothing like quite defined. Okay, careful about that, because it's not the first time that someone defines a SMART objective, but it's not clear, or even worse, it's not possible to obtain. And well, at the end, I might have to say, be careful by establishing objectives, because they are the core element of your strategies. Remember that they need to be related with time, and they must be achievable. Okay, but being achievable means that you know about your numbers, and you know about the history and of the industry in which you are now located. Okay, I'm happy to help you, and of course, if you have any questions, please let me know via Brightspace or email. Thank you. Bye-bye.